Hi, I'm Kevin Meuwissen from the University of Rochester's Warner School of Education, and I'll be discussing my recent Education Policy Analysis Archives paper, co-authored with Jeff Choppin, entitled Pre-Service Teachers' Adaptations to Tensions Associated with the edTPA During Its Early Implementation in New York and Washington States. The edTPA is a performance assessment of teaching that includes three key artifacts: lesson plans, instructional video, and samples of student work with teacher feedback. These are accompanied by written commentaries that rationalize, contextualize, and explain the learning implications of those artifacts. In 2013, New York and Washington became the first states in the U.S. to require that all pre-service teachers complete and pass the edTPA as a condition of state licensure. This is based on the assumption that doing so will strengthen teaching quality by requiring demonstrations of teachers' evidence-based planning, instruction, assessment, and analytical thinking. Yet research conducted by folks like Berliner, Cohen, Grant, and Cochran-Smith and colleagues cautioned those who would use high-stakes assessments as policy levers to induce changes in teaching practice. That said, we wondered how the edTPA's status in New York and Washington as a high-stakes certification mechanism, but also one that was designed to be a teacher learning tool by the Stanford Center for Assessment, Learning, and Equity, impacted candidates' teaching practices and circumstances. This paper utilizes semi-structured interviews with 24 pre-service teachers across New York and Washington, conducted from June through September of 2014 during the first year of edTPA implementation in those states. This was part of a larger, ongoing, mixed method study. Drawing from Way and Pichone's framework for teacher performance assessment in a policy context, and Stillman's notion of productive tensions as situations in which teachers learn to address divergent policy and practice demands, we identified three tensions associated with edTPA completion. The first kind of tension is what we call support tensions, defined as ambiguities about what kinds of faculty and peer assistance are appropriate and allowable in light of the assessment's characterization as both formative and summative. One way pre-service teachers mediated these tensions was through extensive social networking, the approaches to which we elaborate in our paper. The second kind is what we call representation tensions, which we define as difficulties approximating and demonstrating complex, contextualized teaching practice given the demands and constraints of the assessment. Pre-service teachers mediated these tensions largely through strategic commentary writing. Sometimes this meant presenting their teaching as orderly and aligned with the edTPA rubrics, even when it wasn't in practice. The third kind is what we call agency tensions, which relate to candidates' capacities to control and act upon external factors that impacted their teaching circumstances and practices. To address this tension, some candidates appealed to the authority of the test and negotiated with cooperating teachers and supervisors for support when necessary, while others simply endured discrepancies between their teaching circumstances and the demands of the assessment. Returning to Stillman's notion of productive tensions, we found that the practice of social networking contributed to shared strategizing, peer-reviewed writing, and other generative problem-solving interactions among candidates, but that these interactions often excluded teacher educators out of concern over impermissible modes of faculty support. Some candidates also found the edTPA beneficial for their analytical and reflective writing, and for using the writing process to broker discretion and assert some autonomy in their pedagogical decision-making. For others, however, writing the edTPA portfolio was more a process of gaming the assessment, with candidates focusing predominantly on how external raters might evaluate their work products. Furthermore, we found no evidence that the process of negotiating the edTPA's demands in a dissonant school or classroom context benefited candidates' teaching practices. Most participants who spoke of that phenomenon characterized the edTPA taking process as a stressful effort to control for constraints and variables with the core goal of avoiding test failure. In the end, we're reminded of Campbell's law when considering the edTPA's use as a high-stakes certification tool. That is, the more any measurement is used for policy decision-making, the more subject it will be to corruption pressures, and the more apt it will be to distort the social processes it is intended to monitor. The edTPA has great potential as a tool for naming and assessing core teaching practices, and for prompting candidates to demonstrate and analyze the learning outcomes of those practices. However, its role in a policy context also can restrict its formative capacities and introduce the corruption pressures that Campbell identifies. A more optimistic way of looking at that dilemma is that the edTPA's high-stakes status in New York and Washington also makes its implementation an opportunity for teacher educators to develop candidates' capacities as engaged mediators of policy and practice tensions, to use Cohen and Hill's language. Those capacities inevitably will be important over the course of our participants' teaching careers. Thanks for watching this video. We encourage you to check out our full paper in Education Policy Analysis archives and hope you find it compelling and beneficial.